my fellow Christian fiction lovers, welcome to another video. Today I am going to be doing a Christian review of Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. I have read this book 2 times now, and it was even better the second time. And I did a review very recently of another very popular non-Christian book, and it went over quite well and actually convinced some of you guys not to read it. But I kind of want to do the opposite with this book. If you were thinking of not reading it, I would like to convince you to give it a shot. And if you're thinking of reading it, well, this is just even more convincing, I guess. So like I said, this will be a Christian review, so I will be speaking from a Christian standpoint about the morals and other things in this book. So if that's not what you base your reading choices on, or you just don't care, just keep it in mind or watch a different review of this book, but it's how I'll be talking about Where the Crawdads Sing. So moving forward. So in Where the Crawdads Sing, we follow Kaya, who has been labeled by the local village as the Marsh Girl because basically she was deserted by her entire family because it was kind of a traumatic growing up experience and her parents didn't get along and they all just left, basically. And in one portion of the book, it's kind of this turning point for her when she recognizes that she is alone in the world, and she kind of just takes on this mindset that now the marsh is her mother because it's set in the marshes of South Carolina, actually like not too far away from where I live now, which is kind of cool. And basically it is a coming of age story as we watch Kaya go from this 6-year-old to this young woman, and she just grows up. She never goes to school. She is obsessed with nature. She knows more about like the natural marsh world than most scientists do and biologists and all of that. And she's just so intelligent, and she ends up learning to read because this local boy befriends her and is one of the very few people who is actually nice to her. She does kind of fall in love with him because he's the only boy who has taken an interest in her. And then he leaves her too and deserts her. And yeah, she just kind of recognizes that she is always going to be alone in the world. But I am not, because my dog plays when I film videos. And she just recognizes that she's all alone in this world and she has to be the one to take care of herself. And that is basically the plot of this book. Now, while we're following Kaya's coming of age, we are also having these snippets of a murder investigation of the star quarterback of the town who was found murdered in the marsh. And the #1 suspect is Kaya, because it just seems too clean. Like the murder scene just seems too clean and there are no prints left behind, no evidence whatsoever, and so everybody points to her because Kaya like knows the marsh backwards and forwards and would know how to get away with something like that. That's the premise, and I'm not going to tell you what happens. But yeah, so we flip back and forth, and then eventually the two do come together and we get what's happening from Kaya's perspective, not just the investigators. And so that's the plot, and the plot does carry on pretty well once Kaya has kind of, for those of you who are unaware, I have a dog who makes her presence known. So once Kaya has kind of like, she's met the boy who teaches her to read, once all that happens, the plot carries on very consistently and steadily. The first little bit of time where her family is leaving and she's coming to terms with what's going on in her world as a 6-year-old, that's a bit slow, I will be honest. And reading it through the second time, knowing what's coming, makes it even better, and like you can really absorb those first 100 pages or so. But the first time through, I will say it's kind of a drudge in the beginning. But after that little bit, the plot is pretty good, and it's a good plot. It really is. Now, the characters. Kaya is our main character. We basically get the entire book from her perspective, almost. And she's a thinker. She interprets the world very differently because she's never had society tell her how to think or what to think. She has very few memories of her mother and her mother's lessons. So with those few memories of her mother and then what Kaya learns on her own as she raises herself in the marsh is all she has to interpret the world. And this perspective that we get is just so different than anything I've ever read. And I quite enjoyed it and kind of learned some lessons from Kaya as she is coming to the same conclusions about life and love and just life and love, I guess. She comes to these conclusions that are kind of well known, but she comes to them through her own avenues that are a little different from what some are used to. I mean, she never goes to high school, so she never has a high school heartbreak, or she never, is bullied by the bullies next to her locker. But things like that still happen to her in just a different way. And also her being a child, being a teenager, and then a young woman by herself it's just so interesting to read how she thinks some of the very same thoughts that other teenage girls would think, yet she doesn't necessarily know that know that that is the norm for thinking that way, because she does not have a single friend, and I'm not even exaggerating that. She has the one guy friend when she's a teenager. She has no girlfriends ever. So that guy, Tate, his character, I found him to be a really good character. He's a good friend to her, and then when he leaves, he's a complete jerk for leaving, and I didn't like him for that, but it fit his character. And when it comes out about why he left and why he deserted her like everybody else, it makes sense. And then they kind of have this reunion and building the bridge of trust again. It's perfect. His character stays consistent. Her character continues to grow and change. I mean, so does his. His name is Tate. I don't know why I just keep saying his. Tate is probably my favorite character in the book, honestly. And then another very prominent character that comes in probably more in the later half of the book is Chase Andrews, and he is the murder victim. And he and Kaya kind of get close once Tate leaves her. He takes an interest in her, but not in the same way that Tate does. And watching her juggle the two and trying to, reconcile her feelings about Tate versus her feelings about Chase, it's just so good. Her interpretation of the world is just so different, and I just quite enjoy it. So, yeah, Chase's character he's a terrible character, but he's done in such a way that it's good. I will never stop saying that if you dislike a character so thoroughly, it means that they were a well-written character, because the author convinced you to dislike their character. They did their job, and I could go on about that for a while. But anyway, so that is the plot and the characters. The characters develop, definitely. And now I kind of want to get into what it is to read this book as a Christian. So there is a fair amount of language in this book. I would say the language comes in mostly when the characters are very angry and they swear. And while I'm not an advocate for swearing when you're angry, not at all, it fits their characters. The language is not, there aren't curse words in every single chapter, being said all the time. I would say it's a very reasonable amount, and it's not overdone. How about that? There is some sexual content. There is nothing explicit. There's nothing goes into depth. I would say it's handled fairly well. I mean, there is some sex outside of marriage. I wouldn't say it's overdone or talked about too much, and there is nothing explicit. There are no direct sex scenes. It's kind of just referenced to, I guess, if that makes sense. Or she just talks about how she's feeling emotionally while it's happening. She never actually says what's going on. She being Kaya, the main character. So those would be the only two things that could trip up a Christian reader. Didn't really bother me. Okay, so I'm gonna try and be short with my next little bit because I have thought long and hard about this. But the absence of Christ in this book. What? Don't bark at me. I'm talking. as I was saying, the absence of Christ in this book is a big mistake. And I'm aware that the author is not a Christian. She did not want to write this book from a Christian perspective. But with Kaya growing up in the marsh and around nature, she has a Bible in her shack. I felt like the inclusion of a Christian worldview and her growing closer to her creator through knowing the marsh, becoming completely immersed in it, obsessed with it, a student of nature, essentially, is what she was. I just felt the inclusion of her, I don't know, just knowing her creator, it would have been so good. And I could expand on this a lot. Those are my thoughts on it. That is my summation of Where the Crawdads Sing. I give this book a 4.5 out of, well, yeah, 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's not quite a 5-star read. I think there are some things that would definitely have made it a 5-star read, and I've kind of talked about that. But anyway, let me know your plans with this book. Are you going to read it? Have you read it? As a Christian, what did you think about it? What do you think about it based off of my review? Whatever. I would love to talk about it and discuss whether this is a good book for a Christian to read. So, thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, don't forget to give it a like, and if you want to see more content like this, go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Until then, bye!